Coming up tonight, we went from the cold, now to the beaches. Jewel of the Seas visits sunny Santa Barbara. And this is the end, the last night of the cruise view for the sailing, and we take a look back at what's occurred so far. Plus, an end always means another beginning, so we look ahead at what's to come next. It's all coming up, so let's set sail. Welcome to the 8th and final night of the cruise view sailing on board the Jewel of the Seas. Today, we're going to take a look, of course, at what occurred today on this last night, as well as a look back at what's occurred throughout this series and the sailing, as well as a look ahead to what is coming up next for the cruise view. So today, of course, was Friday, September 25th, and just like immediately following San Francisco, we had a stop in Monterey, right down the road. We once again had a similar situation today where we stopped at Santa Barbara, right down the road from Los Angeles, where we will be tomorrow. And this morning, we had an arrival at roughly 7 a.m. right around the time the sun was rising once again. And just like with Monterey, it is a smaller port that does see a bit more traffic than Monterey does. It is a rather standard stop for some of the princess ships who do round-trip routes out of Los Angeles that include it, but it is not a very heavily trafficked one, and as a result does not have any form of pier or other support system for cruise ships in place, so of course that meant the tenders were out once again today. And that started at about 7 a.m. and ran until 5 p.m. was the official listed time for the last tender. Today it seems like it wasn't long after 5 p.m. that they actually did have the true last tender, unlike yesterday where it went for about an hour past the last tender. Our departure was then an hour later at 6 p.m. and everything was closed up on the ship. Everything seemed set to go long ahead of the 6 p.m. departure day. About 5:40 p.m. it seemed like everything was ready to go, including the Coast Guard, which showed up once again at 5:30 p.m. in their very defensive mannerisms again, going out after any boat that even got in the same direction as where our ship was. So they really continued that the whole way, and I'm guessing it must be normal because every port of call in the U.S. has had a Coast Guard reacting in the same way with two boats in full defensive mode of the cruise ship. And it's still kind of odd that it's only during departure time. It's not at all during the day while we were sitting out there anchored in the bay and other boats and sailboats were sailing all around us, and it wasn't a big deal. It was only once we were getting ready to move that the Coast Guard took control of the entire area. And they had a little bit longer to wait today because there was a malfunction of the davits that actually hoist one of the tenders up. So even though they were very efficient today and got everything cleaned up and ready to go in time to actually leave about 20 minutes early compared to our 6 p.m. scheduled departure, that did hold them up. And we had, I'm assuming they did some maneuvering to get the ship into place because I saw a slight rotation of the ship in one direction, and once they did get the boat into place, we rotated in the opposite direction. So I'm assuming it may have been heat related because the direction they turned the ship did move that davit out of the sun. So it could have been some kind of malfunction related to the temperatures since it was a very hot day, but in either case, they did get it working about 6:30 p.m. They finally got it fixed and were able to hoist that last tender up. It did come up much slower and with a very different sound to it. So I'm thinking it may have been a manual override or some alternate system and not actually a fix to the issue that was preventing them from using the proper system to hoist that tender up. But as soon as it was out of the water, pretty much the exact moment it stopped touching the water, the ship did start to do its rotation to head back out to sea, and we did immediately leave then at that 6:30 p.m. time slot, only about 30 minutes behind schedule. And that shouldn't affect things. Originally, the captain had announced we only need about 9 knots to get to Los Angeles on time, so hitting 10 knots will easily make up that half hour that he fell behind schedule. And as for the weather today, we had a sunrise at 6:49 a.m. this morning. And this evening, just after we got that lifeboat ready to go and rotated and started heading out to sea at 6:51 p.m., we did have a sunset. And the high for today was 83 degrees with very warm and sunny conditions. Great weather to see after that cold and foggy conditions we're constantly hearing at the start of this sailing. And today the skies were mostly blue with some wispy clouds. There was a very light to no wind going on throughout the day, but as we're getting ready to depart, the winds did pick up a little bit and we had about 30-mile-an-hour winds around the time that we were getting ready to leave the port of call. So with such a beautiful day, how do you spend it? On the beach, of course. So today I took advantage of the day and went off on my own again to do some beach visits. And that was very easy to do in Santa Barbara. This morning, the tendering for excursions began at 7 a.m. Being on my own, of course, that did not apply to me, and I'm not sure if they did anything differently this time. But by 8:10 a.m., they were calling the first of the tender tickets to go down and board their tenders. So they did seem to get through quicker, but that could just be fewer people had excursions today than Monterey. It's hard to say for sure since I didn't see what those crowds were like. But by 10 a.m., they had finished all the tender tickets and they were moving on to a first come basis, and it was basically show up at the tender when you're ready to head ashore and you could go immediately. Today that ride took about 20 minutes, so slightly longer than yesterday's tender ride, but it still seemed to flow smoothly. They did get a little off pattern. It seemed like they had the 4 tenders going, but it seemed like they got a little bit off so that there was a gap in the rotation that if you hit it at the wrong time you could wait a little bit longer for a tender to show up, while other times there were 2 tenders in place, but either unloading on the shore side or loading on the ship side, and the secondary one waiting its turn. And today our tenders did unload in the actual ferry marina area. It did have to enter the bay and go around, and pretty much got right up to the shoreline to actually empty us out. So it was a very convenient location, and they pretty much took over the entire area of that pier. They had multiple checkpoints set up there, including an area with lines of seats for people under a covered roof and refreshments. So if you were waiting out there to get back to the ship, you did have a nice little area to sit down and relax while you waited for your tender to be ready to take you. And with that convenient location, that obviously was a huge benefit for me, as we basically could leave that pier and immediately step onto the sand of the beach. And that beach extended for, I believe I saw somewhere it's an actual 12-mile long beach, but that specific area extended all the way to a large pier with a bunch of restaurants on it, and I spent a small portion of the morning in that area there. In that area the seas were rather calm, but there's a lot of seaweed and things like that in the water. We then moved to the other side of the pier later in the day and spent the rest of the day over there, and in that location the water was clear blue. You could see straight to the bottom. It was beautiful sea conditions over there, and because there was no seaweed in the water, that meant the beach was also cleaner over there. But if you're like me and don't like swimming with sea creatures, unfortunately that clear water was also great for them, and there were stingrays as well as sand sharks in that water swimming around in the same area that people were in the water. So if you are considering the beaches in Santa Barbara, they are very convenient and easy to get to. It is a simple way to spend your day, but do consider that there could be stuff in the water where you are swimming. And that water, like most of the seas in California, is not as warm as the air. Today in Santa Barbara, the sea conditions are supposed to be about 64 degrees, so it was a bit chilly when the air was up in the mid to upper 80s for most of the day. And as for the time on the ship, with the compass, of course, the dinner tonight was the Pomodoro menu, which I believe is the traditional last night menu. It seems like no matter how long the itinerary is, it's typically served the very last night of the sailing. And for my starter, I started with the French onion soup, a dish that Royal Caribbean seems to have a lot of trouble with. Every ship I've been on, it's varied. Some the bread's been burned, sometimes there's no cheese. Today the bread was soft and good. There wasn't that much cheese. It was just an okay dish. It's one of those things that every ship seems to get slightly different, and nobody seems to have quite gotten it right yet. And then for my entree, I did the rigatoni pasta with prosciutto Chardonnay wine sauce. Another dish I've done on several sailings, and once again a great dish on this ship. And for dessert tonight, my absolute favorite dessert of the entire ship on any ship in the fleet is the frozen strawberry souffle. If you've never had it, do try it. It is delicious. It's like a combination of ice cream and a mousse. It is really creamy yet not quite cold, but it still has that texture and consistency of ice cream, but it kind of feels like mousse. It's a really interesting mix of textures and temperatures, and really a good dish. And of course, it's strawberry and tastes delicious, so be sure to check that out when you see it on the menu, most likely on the last night of your sailings. And following that, there was then just one show for all guests tonight, just like the welcome show. Tonight was the farewell show with a single showing, and that was at 7:15 p.m. Tonight it started out with a pre-recorded message from the captain, and then went into the Cruise and Review DVD, showed some clips of that before Dennis came out.
On a wonderful day like today, I defy any cloud to appear in the sky. I dare any raindrop to pop in my eye on a wonderful day like today.
And went through a little bit of a humorous routine on what you're going to miss and how you're going to handle different situations when you do get ashore and leave the Jewel of the Seas. And then that led into the guest performer tonight, who was Jeff Neese, another comedian for the sailing. And my opinion, one of the better acts that we had this sailing. He was hilarious and a perfect one for a farewell show. A lot of Royal Caribbean humor, cruise humor in general. A lot of his jokes were very focused on the guests and Royal Caribbean's brand, as well as making fun of some other lines, including Holland America. But he had a very casual and natural style that felt very conversational and like it was flowing, not a pre-planned set list that he was likely running through. But it was a very short act, only maybe 20 minutes long, so it was not a very long act, and he only did the one show. So I kind of wish they had brought him out a previous night, even if it was like an adult comedy or something late at night, because he did seem like a very good act, but we did not get to see a whole lot of him because it was only a 20-minute segment for him to fill in.
Royal Caribbean. I was on another cruise line not too long ago. I won't mention the line, but their officers come from Holland and America. And my God, I am glad to be here because you people are young. That sucker was a floating nursing home. I'm not kidding. It was really, really old people and their parents. I'm not kidding.
And then, following that, of course, Dennis came back out again to talk about how much he's going to miss us and bring out the crew of the Jewel of the Seas who have been working all sailing long, starting with the singers and dancers to do a final little performance with the Royal Caribbean Orchestra. And then, of course, all the officers and different crew members representing the various areas of the ship to say their final farewell to all the guests on this last night of the sailing.
If you've had a great cruise, these are the people that made your dreams come true. If you love them, now's the time to show it.
So in all, that show lasted about the typical 45 minutes. It was over at 8 o'clock, and most of those entertainment staff members were not done for the night. There was at 9 p.m., both of these in the Safari Lounge at the back of the ship. 9 p.m. was big band dancing with the Jewel Orchestra. So the main orchestra that is normally up here in the theater performing background music for the various shows and guest entertainers was over in the Safari Lounge doing a final farewell show for the guests. And then after a short break at 10 p.m., they had cabaret showtime with the Royal Caribbean Singers, where they came out and joined the band to do a few songs. And that also lasted about 45 minutes, 50 minutes, just like the big band's show, just to say a final farewell to all the guests and end this final night on board the Jewel of the Seas. So that really is the end of this sailing. It was a very intense sailing with so many things going on, but we still have tomorrow morning where we get off the ship. And according to the captain, we're supposed to pick up the pilot about 5:30. And be docked by 6:45 a.m. at that time, of course, guests will all have to leave the Jewel of the Seas like they do following any cruise. Unfortunately, nobody likes to see it end, but it was a very exciting and fun cruise. One of the more interesting ones I've done. I've, of course, done a variety of ones, including Bermuda, Caribbean Transatlantic. It's always nice when you get one that just feels different and stands out, and this certainly did with its unique itinerary, as over the past 8 nights we've started in Vancouver on September 18th. Of course, got to sail under the bridge on our way out and even see her arrive early in the morning. We went to Victoria the very next day after an incredibly slow sailing through that night, and after a little bit of fog and rain, continued out into the first seas of the sailing with some roughness before reaching Astoria with another foggy arrival. And then, after more rough seas leaving the Columbia River, we had our single day at sea, the one day to actually stay on board for everybody and enjoy the Jewel of the Seas before saying goodbye for 2 days as we arrived in San Francisco on the 22nd and remained there through the night into the 23rd with that incredible view of the Bay Bridge, as well as a good view of Alcatraz, the Golden Gate Bridge, and all of San Francisco. And then on the 24th, of course, after a short little drive up the coast, we made it to Monterey for our first tender stop of the cruise. And then today we were in Santa Barbara for the beach day. Tomorrow, of course, will be our final departure as we get to the San Pedro cruise terminal in Los Angeles. So, like I said, it was a very port-intensive cruise, but it had a solid lineup of ports. I think every one was really a winner. If I had to pick one that could be limited, it would probably be Victoria, because it was a little redundant of Vancouver. But if everyone flew into Vancouver and went right on the ship, it really isn't redundant. So it was a truly solid lineup. There aren't really any duds in that port list. And there was a ton of variety to them, with all the nature and the coolness, the fog, the rain, the cold, all that stuff up north those first couple days. And interestingly, it wasn't the location that changed, but the time, as we were in San Francisco for our final cold and wet and really kind of yucky day, as well as in San Francisco for our first hot, dry, calm day. So it really did change at the halfway point of the sailing, and after San Francisco, of course, everything remained beautiful and warm. And of course, with all that changing weather, you also had all different nature playing a role in it, as up north we had tons of seals and sea lions, pretty much every port for almost the entire cruise. I think Santa Barbara was probably the first we did not see any, but they all had seals and sea lions right along the ship, and the first several days we even saw those whales all the way up through when we left San Francisco. That was the last time we saw those whales. So there's a ton of nature involved. Even if you never left the ship, never took any specialized excursions, just staying on board, it was all around us the whole time. And for that reason, I would definitely do it again. I mean, you can go to the Caribbean a million times, but at the end of the day, most of those islands are just islands and everyone goes out on a boat or they go to a beach. You really can't get this kind of view, the scenery, the nature that you get in these ports, and that uniqueness that each port had to it when you're just visiting all these islands. So it truly is a unique and special itinerary that hopefully they'll run more often. I believe the Explorer is doing a modified version next year that won't be able to do all the same ports because she is a larger ship, but it will be a Pacific Coastal Repositioning down the coast. And if I were to change it, I'd probably add one more sea day in there. It was supposed to be a port-intensive itinerary, and that certainly did not let us down, but it was just a little bit too intense for me with a lot of these protocols being very long since they were so close together. So I personally would have liked to see an extra sea day thrown in there. We had the format of Vancouver to Victoria to Astoria, a sea day, 2 days in San Francisco, and Monterey, which were grouped together. Would have been nice if there was maybe a sea day between Monterey and Santa Barbara, just to sort of group those ports into the 3 different regions they are, because really when you do look at the itinerary, there are actually 3 distinct sections of the country, well, of North America that we did visit on this itinerary. So an extra sea day in there would have helped break it up, give everybody another chance to relax before going into that final protocol in Santa Barbara and then leaving the ship tomorrow. So it was all about the itinerary, but it was also about the ship to a lesser extent. It was the first time I was on a Radiance class, that I've mentioned before, and I did go through a little bit of this a couple days ago. But to touch on some of these items again, where does the Jewel fit in my opinion? I personally did enjoy her. I thought she was a very solid ship. There's a lot to offer, a lot of things to see, and she looks very new and modern, even though she's over a decade old at this point. But she has not been oasisized. And for that reason, I look around her, I see some venues that are obviously superior. This theater is a great example. This is one of the most beautiful theaters, I think, in the fleet. It has, without a doubt, the best seat layout. Almost every seat has an unobstructed view, and there's so much stadium seating to it that you really can see everything no matter where you sit. There really aren't bad seats, and that is not true in almost any theater you go into in the fleet, except for the Radiance class, it seems like. So she does have her big points that really set her apart, but at the same time, there are a lot of venues that are similar to the Vision class, specifically Grandeur, since that's where I have the experience. And this ship, as you do walk around her, you get a lot of that feeling that you got on the Grandeur. They are very similar ships. This is just an obviously newer version of the Grandeur with more balconies and a couple extra features, but the Grandeur's been oasisized. She has the central wow, she has all those other bells and whistles on her, and because of that, it almost counteracts any advances the Jewel did have, any of those little things that set the Jewel ahead. She also has these things that set her behind. So in my opinion, between an oasisized Grandeur and a pre-oasisized Jewel, they're really a toss-up. I can't say one is superior to the other. They both have their aspects that are making them better than the other. And for right now, I think it's pretty much a tie. Once the Jewel does go into her dry dock in April and gets her full oasisizing with the Centrum Wow and all the extra bells and whistles, this ship will easily beat the Grandeur of the Seas. But for now, they're pretty much tied in my opinion. My experience on this sailing, at least, it was pretty comparable to the experience on the Grandeur of the Seas. And when it comes to the appearance of the ship, in addition to all the layout and functionality of the ship feeling like the Grandeur and the Vision class, you also have the appearance. There's the Safari Club that is very detailed, a lot of elements that have a feeling of the quality that was used on the Quantum of the Seas. So on the inside, she is one of the more detailed and beautiful ships in the fleet. I think Quantum has a slight edge just because she's newer and they put a little more time into every venue instead of just picking certain venues like they did on the Radiance class. But on the outside, I don't think anyone would deny that the Radiance class and the Jewel of the Seas are, without a doubt, the most beautiful ships afloat, not just in the Royal Caribbean fleet, but in general in the cruise industry. And going along with those looks and this incredible ship, she also has a solid crew. Whenever you're looking at the crew of a ship, there's pretty much a scale on whether they can be good at their work, a lot of them are, or you get a crew that is very friendly and it becomes a family atmosphere. Some guests prefer one over the other. I personally prefer the friendly aspect. I like when the whole ship feels like one large family. And on this sailing, at least, I think this is the most hard-working crew I have ever seen. And it wasn't even that they worked hard. They just knew their job. They wanted to do a good job. And it seemed like this crew really got their work done. Whenever there were issues, they were really on top of trying to evolve things and resolve them. When we had things like the customs in Astoria and it was kind of falling apart, you saw a continuous evolution of it. They're constantly trying to make things better, more efficient. They want to do their job the best they can. But nobody was not nice, but there wasn't that real family aspect. You never felt like the crew and the passengers were one big family. It always kind of felt like they were the crew and we were the family, but they did an incredible job at their job. So I have to say this really was one of the best crew I've seen. Personally, I prefer when it's a little more balanced, but it is without a doubt the most quality crew I have seen, and it seemed like it was across the board, not just certain divisions or certain divisions falling behind. They really were all on that same high quality standards in every division of this ship, and that was clear with the officers all the way down. It seemed like every level was really invested in their role, which sometimes you don't see that on these cruises, but certainly here we did. And that included the activities team. That had solid chemistry between all of the members, especially Dennis and Daniel, the activities manager and cruise director, which is probably the most critical role to have good chemistry between, as they are the two people in charge of everything. They host the morning show. They really need to be in sync with each other, and oftentimes they'd come out together, and it was almost like they had a telepathic way of communicating, because they could almost pull things off without even talking about what they were doing and do complete improv moments that were completely in sync without communicating. So they really had some great chemistry. You don't see that a lot, but when it does happen, you immediately know it's going to be a good sailing, and that was certainly the case with this one. And of course, a lot of that, as I'm sure you're tired of hearing right now, was also Dennis, the cruise director. Just like with the staff, there are different kinds of cruise directors out there. You can say almost anyone is good if you really wanted to, which is the way I view it. I've had a lot of different cruise directors. I can't think of two that are really alike, but they're all good for different reasons. They can be good because they have a very young and hip vibe to them, good because they've got a very classic, old school hosting feel to it. They feel like an old game show host or something. I've had some of them that were great. You can have one that's very personable. You can have one that is hilarious at improv. You can have one that's an entertainer. You can have all different kinds of cruise directors. And some people may prefer one over the other, but it doesn't mean that a cruise director is bad because they are not great at a certain aspect. Everyone is usually great at something different, and that's what makes them all special and makes each sailing unique. Dennis, on the other hand, I could pretty much name any characteristic of a cruise director, and I think it would fit him perfectly. From hosting the game shows to his improv acts, his physical comedy, his singing, dancing. I mean, you pretty much could throw anything at him and he could do it. He took charge of every aspect of the ship. I don't think I've seen a cruise director that really had as diverse a skill set as Dennis, and it's obvious why he's been with the company for so long, because he really knows his stuff. And I don't know if he would be able to handle an Oasis class ship, one of these new ones, because they are bigger, there's a lot more going on, and maybe this is the perfect size for him, but he certainly seems like somebody that Royal Caribbean should be looking at to take out one of these new ships, because he knows how to take charge of a ship and get to know everybody, get everybody involved in the events, and that's really what you need as these ships get larger. You need somebody that has a bigger presence and is more invested in all the different events and constantly out there rather than standing on the sides or hosting stuff or only available for parts of it. He really could do almost anything that was thrown at him, and he showed it the entire sailing long. So it'll be interesting to see in the future if they try to use him anywhere else or if he remains on these smaller ships. And of course, I would personally love to see him take out one of the new ones like the Harmony of the Seas, or even try out a Quantum class ship. You got the huge 270, which is a great show lounge, and he would be perfect to handle an area like that. And I'm sure once she gets Oasis-sized, and when you add all that lighting and all the extra features on board this ship, it's going to be incredible what he can pull off with all these new abilities that'll be opened up to him on board the Jewel of the Seas, if he does remain here. So overall, it was a solidly running sailing. Really nothing that you can complain about or criticize. Most of the time when there was something that wasn't very good, it was not something that was completely in their control, or it was something that they could tweak in the future. And for the most part, because they all want to do their job so good, it felt like they were constantly trying to make those changes on the spot, not say, okay, next sailing we'll do it differently. Mid-process, they'd try to fix them, so there really isn't much you can complain about it. Everything was great. We had great weather, great itinerary, great crew, great ship, no real issues. Some rocky seas, but nothing too bad. It was about as perfect a sailing as you can get. We had some great events like the International Crew Parade, which is always a great event for all the passengers and the crew involved. If you're ever on a sailing that has one, make sure you go out, because it is a great way to recognize those crews and the diversity that comes from them, along with a more simplistic welcome reception. And of course, the parties, including that incredible 70s party from last night, where they really took over the entire venue and pretty much beat out what technology could do. And of course, this wasn't all about the ship, it was the itineraries, and we had all those great arrivals and departures from all these port of calls. Almost every single day we had one of each, along with some beautiful sunrises and sunsets. Not so much at the beginning and end, but certainly in that middle of this sailing, it was just incredible to see some of those, and the way the sun rose up over the Bay Bridge was truly one of those sights not many people get to experience unless you have an expensive apartment in that area, or you take a cruise like this and get to dock right there with that perfect view of everything. And of course, it was the ship that allowed us to see those great views, and she is a beautiful ship with so many different areas and features on board, and they're only going to get better once she gets that Oasis sizing in April. But she was not the star of this sailing, as Mother Nature really took charge, and we saw all those seals and whales. Really, there were more things to see for the guests that stayed on board the ship the entire time than those that took excursions, because everything was visible right here from on board the Jewel of the Seas. But if you did choose to leave the ship, we had some awesome excursions, whether it was a hot sunny beach or a cold whale watching adventure. It was all offered on board this sailing, something that's really kind of unique to this, that you had such extremes across the board and everything in between. And for most people on board, this would be the end, but it is not for me. This is actually the midpoint of this trip, but it is the end for the CruiseView. Well, I started with 2 days in Vancouver and then the 8 nights here. That was the first 10 nights of this vacation. I now have 10 more nights once we get to LA to spend in Disneyland. With some excursions out to the Queen Mary. Universal Studios. Warner Brothers Studios. Hollywood Walk of Fame. And of course, whatever other sites come up throughout the Los Angeles area. So I'm sure there'll be some videos from those excursions and Disneyland, of course, you can check out in addition to the cruise view and all of these Jewel of the Seas videos from this sailing. But in addition to this vacation not being over, the cruise view is not over. There's always another sailing just around the corner, and up next, we went small with the Jewel of the Seas, now we're going big again. Going on board the Harmony of the Seas next October for the 13-night westbound transatlantic. This will be the second time I'm on a transatlantic, second time I'm on an Oasis class, the first time, of course, being right when the Oasis set sail, so she wasn't completely up and running at that point. Harmony, on the other hand, will be operating roughly 5 months at that time, so everything should be fully functional. This will be her first sailing longer than 7 nights. It'll be interesting to see how they handle that. Of course, the Oasis and the Allure already went over to Europe for their dry dockings and included transatlantics on that, so it's not the first lengthy voyage for an Oasis class, but it is the first for the Harmony of the Seas. And big ship, long itinerary, loads of sea days. We have 2 stops in Spain right at the beginning, followed by over a week straight at sea, which means it's going to be a loaded episode of the Cruise View each day of that voyage. More in line with what we saw in the Quantum of the Seas. I've got a lot of big plans that I'm trying to get together for that one. Most of them worked out when I went into the Quantum of the Seas with large plans, so I'm hoping if I keep aiming higher, I'll be able to keep pulling off more stuff and get some great coverage for the next sailing of the Cruise View, which will be next October, starting October 23rd, 2016, out of Barcelona to Fort Lauderdale. And unless anything changes, following that sailing, then a couple months later, in about April 2017, will be a Quantum reunion as board the Anthem of the Seas out of New York for a 12-night Southern Caribbean sailing to give that class another shot. They'll have over 2 years to rethink the project and the concepts involved and try to improve on the product, so we'll see how that one goes. That'll be in April, but of course Harmony is next, and that will be a huge series, so be sure to tune in for that one next year. And of course, there's been loads of Jewel coverage, so check out all the links and watch all that. So for now, I am Picone. Hope you enjoyed this series from on board the Jewel of the Seas. Thanks for watching and stay tuned for more.